Incredible.
Okay, let's start again. We're talking about Mama.
Yeah. My mom's name is Jennie, Jennie, May, Mae. Her maiden name is Archer, and Cox was her married name, which was my married name, or my, surname. And she had a very unusual upbringing because she lived in a very affluent family, and she was the first child born, and she had one brother born after her, and then her father died. And so she was the only one who remembered her father. Her younger brother, the only brother she had, her mother married again and had a series of 4 children by her second marriage. But her own father died of, I don't know, she called it erysipelas, and it was some kind of like a pneumonia, I think, but it had to do with your brain, and it destroys brain cells. That was what her father died of, and he was very young. Her mother was married. They went to school, and they both went to college. Mom and Dad never ever got to do that. Mom went to the 2nd grade. Dad never went to school in his life. I taught my dad how to write his name.
Wow.
He didn't know how to write his name. He didn't know how to spell his name. He knew Cox, but he didn't know how to spell it. And so when I learned how to write, I asked him to write his name. And he said, I don't know how. And I said, you don't know how to write your name? You're a big boy. How come you don't? I was I was like 5 or 6 because I just started school. And he said, no, I never got to go to school because I was the mother of the house. He was the second oldest son. Uncle Rui was first, then Dad, then Uncle Melvin, and Uncle Lester. That was the 4. And they had a sister. Her name was Esma. And she died in her first childbirth like his mother died in her 5th childbirth.
Okay.
And it was, you didn't go to the hospital in Oklahoma. They were actually married before Oklahoma became a state.
Wow.
My mother and Dad moved to Oklahoma before Oklahoma became a state.
Wow.
And so they knew a lot about what was going on. I'm forgetting where I was supposed to go with all
So we're talking about your mom?
Okay. My mom lived in Archer. Her last name was Archer, and she lived in Archer, Oklahoma.
Really?
And she and her brother were born to her mother, and her father got sick and died. So they were on their own and she was from an affluent family. Her mother was from a very affluent family. But once she was not married to their son, they didn't do a lot of paying attention to them once the grandfather died. And the grandfather died like 2 years after his son died. And so they were out on their own then. And her mother went to work cooking, and she was an educated woman. Mom didn't get a chance for an education. But her mother was very educated and lived in a family that was affluent. But when she married, she moved away from her family, a good long way away from her family. They didn't get home probably every 3 or 4 years to wherever. She lived in Ada, Oklahoma was where she was born and raised. But she married Dad. Dad came to work where Mom lived and was helping a family out because they were harvesting their crop. And Dad came to help harvest the crop because he had to make a living. He was a young man. He said, when I got dressed, I had to get up on a stump to spit because I had this big starched shirt on. He was very proud of that he dressed very dapper. Well, he went to work for this family because his mother died, and his dad was a doctor. Dad's father was a doctor. And so the baby was a girl, and they left Dad home to take care of her because you couldn't leave her. And his dad was a doctor, so he was gone a lot. The other boys, he never did describe what they did, but they didn't do housework and they didn't take care of the baby. That was Dad's job. Dad was a good cook. He cooked for our school even when I was a young child. And he talked about, it was another part of Oklahoma, and when they moved to the Bennington area because his dad was a doctor and Bennington needed a doctor.
Oh.
And so Dad used to drive him because his dad had a car. In fact, I used to play in that car because it was parked behind the smokehouse, and nobody knew. Dad didn't know how to drive it. The other boys were younger, so I doubt that they had learned how to drive a car. So it sat there, and it had gear shifts on the wheels like this. And so me and Francis would sit out there and pretend like we were going someplace in this old rusty car that had a cloth roof and windows in the back, and you'd let the shades down on the side. And it was a wonderful thing. And then the Second World War came, which was the big German war, where Germany attacked Pearl Harbor, and we were at war. And so they had a big metal drive because we didn't have a war machine. And they took all of the broken plows and anything that you had that was any kind of metal, you had to take it to the school, and then the government would send a truck down. They'd pick all of that up, take it to a smelter, and melt that metal down and make it into machine guns and that kind of thing, because we didn't have a war machine. They had to put one together in a hurry. So my great big car that we got to play with the gear shifts on the side like that was taken to be melted into metal for a great big, I've forgotten what you call them, but you get inside of them and cover them up, and you're covered with metal all around, and it has guns that shoots everything.
Like a tank?
A tank. They were made to make tanks out of.
Wow.
And so I really lamented that they took our car, because that's all we had to play with, or out in the woods. We didn't have a doll at that point. At a Christmas when I was 11, I think it was. I was 11 and Francis was 9.
Yeah.
We got our very first doll. Oh my gosh. It was Jeanette and Janelle. Hers was Janelle and mine was Jeanette.
Yeah.
And she was beautiful. I could not imagine having lived life without her. But when we left Oklahoma and came to California, because there was work there and we planned to go back to Oklahoma, only when Mom saw how much easier life was in California, she refused to go back to Oklahoma. So the family that took our doll and put it in a couch that we also left, that Ann left at our house, because her husband was divorcing her and she had a couch. So we used the couch as long as we were home there. But we took the couch to Miss Coburn's, and our dolls were in the pull-out drawer that was under it, because we couldn't ride the bus. We had to go from Bennington to Casa Grande, Arizona, and then we picked cotton to make enough money to get us from Casa Grande, Arizona to California.
Wow.
And my doll ended up being Miss Coburn's. Miss Coburn moved up by Disneyland after we were gone for probably about 6 or 8 years. They decided to come to California.
Really?
They lived up by Disneyland. But Charlene couldn't give up our dolls because she thought they were hers. She was little when she started playing with them. And I wanted my doll back desperately, and so did Francis. But we never got it. We saw them when we went up to see them once, but we didn't have the heart to take Charlene's doll away. She thought her doll, but it was the only doll Francis and I ever had.
What was your mom's personality like? What kind of a person was she?
Mom was raised in a very affluent family originally, but when she married, when her mother remarried, they moved away from the family because Mom's own father died young. He died very young. It was what she called erysipelas, and I don't know what that is, but I think it's akin to pneumonia. And I don't know what the symptoms are, but he was only alive for 3 days after he got that disease and died. So she and her mother and her little brother, Mom was at the time, I think, about 6, and her little brother was 3 years younger, so he was 3. And she remembered. Mom had an incredible memory because she was an avid reader. Oh my gosh, she just couldn't get enough reading done. Dad thought it was such a waste of time.
Did
because
he?
you had to read the Bible if you was going to read anything that was worthwhile reading. You didn't just read any old anything. Well, they had a system in our community where guys who wanted to sell magazines, and Life magazine, Life and Post, and there was another one, I can't remember, but it's a very famously known magazine, where the salesman would come through our community, and I bet they wondered why they couldn't sell very many magazines, because what would happen is the women had a system that if a magazine that they all wanted, they decided which ones they wanted, that all of them didn't buy it. This one, like closer to town, would buy Post, the other one would buy Life, and the other one would buy something else. And then everybody would give toward what that cost a month and pay for the whole year of that magazine being shipped to them for a year. And they only bought one magazine, but everybody was contributing to it up here.
That's great.
And they only had to buy one, and they would ship it down to the next one, and then when the next one came, they would ship that one down, and they had Life and Post magazine. And then it went from there to the library at the school.
Oh, that's great.
And the library at the school was about that size.
Like a closet.
And it had drawers across, and you shut it and locked it, because nobody could take a magazine or a book out. And you treated your magazine as though it was a book like this, like your Bible. You didn't want to throw it away, and you didn't rip pages out of it, and you didn't, because the whole community hadn't read it yet.
Right.
You could keep it for a week or 2 or 3, and then you passed it to the neighbor next to you, whoever was like 5 miles away from you usually, because you had usually 10 or 15 acres of ground. And so he wondered, I'm sure, why he only sold one Post and one Life.
So she liked to read. I know she sewed, right?
Oh, she was an avid reader. And she thought she died and went to heaven when she came to California, because they had a real, honest, good library.
Oh.
And they put it in a house right next door to her.
Isn't that great?
And it not only had magazines, but it had all the old classic books, that you would normally read. And then it had the encyclopedias. And so because Dad wouldn't let them have a TV, because he thought that was probably like a movie and it was probably sinful, so they couldn't have a TV. So Mom and Donna read every single book in the Carlsbad Library.
Wow.
That they had
Impressive.
at that time. I'm sure they've got way more now, but they since, when Mom died first, so Donna had to say, I'm going to have a TV in my bedroom, whether or not you like that. And he thought it was like a movie. It was probably sinful because it was moving around instead of staying still. You could look at staying still pictures, but you couldn't see a movie. When they showed a movie inside of our church, because Billy Graham came out with several movies.
Yeah.
And they showed them in our church. Dad would get up and walk out.
Wow.
I think it was because that picture was moving.
Probably.
That's what made it sinful.
Still pictures
it wasn't the
are
content
fine.
of the movie. It was the fact that it was moving. And if Mr. Horner said it was sinful, it didn't get not sinful. It was forever sinful.
Uh-oh. Too bad.